It's weird because I don't know where to necessarily start with this, but what I can say is that if I tried to record this over a year ago, I definitely would have been probably not able to do this because I just wasn't in a mental space where I felt I was mature enough or had the amount of information that I do now to even make this decision, which, you know, led to making this video. And so that's why we're here today, going over the documentary of the last 4 years of my life. So in 2019, I had this idea, and I think when we're young, right, you know, you tell like a little kid, what do you want to be when you grow up? And they say like, oh, I want to be an astronaut, a doctor, and all that. They don't think about the adversity that they're going to encounter when trying to become that. They don't think about the workload that comes with it. They don't think about all the hard stuff. And that was me when I was 19. When I was 19, I was kind of coming off of the whole partying phase with my friends and whatnot. I got tired at one point of just surrounding myself with that energy where, you know, every weekend you go out and try to find some sort of function going on with your friends and stuff. And so I was like, okay, well, I'm going to try to take my fitness a little more seriously and try to really invest myself and put everything that I can into it. And so I eventually kind of started to go on that path and kind of veer away toward that. And during that time, I had always been watching this YouTuber growing up, but I really fell in love with the series that he had in 2019. That was Christian Guzman. And he was doing a summer shredding series, and every day I would just look forward to watching his videos. And then one day, it literally occurred to me, why don't I just do this, right? Like I felt, okay, I have the physique, I have the work ethic, I have the motivation, I have the drive, and I have like the passion for this. So why not just do it? But there was a problem, and the problem was that I didn't have enough money at the time. I was only working at my dad's grocery store part-time, and I was only making, I think minimum wage at the time was only $11 an hour, and so I didn't have enough money for a camera to get started. So I sold my Xbox to buy a camera. So essentially I gave up video games and whatnot to buy a camera, and then my journey began from there. And like I said, I was in that headspace where I was like that little kid thinking that, okay, when I start this journey where I wanted to be an entrepreneur, own my own brands, you know, gym, you know, be a YouTuber, I just thought like, oh, okay, all this stuff is essentially just gonna fall into place without me really having to go through any pains or any troubles. You know, I just really thought that it was gonna happen. That's great, you know, because that's faith right there. That's essentially, you know, you being able to vision something and go, okay, I'm gonna run with that. Like that's gonna work. And so as soon as I got my camera, I got to work. Everything was pretty good to start off with. You know, the end of 2019 was pretty great. I had gotten a little bit of traction on social media, but it wasn't until 2020 until like I got a lot of traction. I remember at one point I was gaining 10,000 plus followers a day, like sometimes. I literally kid you not. I don't even know if I still have the analytics and whatnot of that data, but I know for a fact it was happening because I went from 690 followers in 2019 all the way to, oh man, what was that number? I think it was, man, it was above 100K. So in other words, I literally gained over 100,000 subscribers in less than a year, and I think it was actually around 10 months. So I gained around 100-something thousand plus subscribers in 10 months, and so it was just so incredibly fast. And one thing that I've come to learn when you are building a brand and establishing something on social media from that growth that I got in 2020, from 2019 to 2020, is that fast growth isn't necessarily great, because what happens is you establish an audience with the type of content that you're posting that is getting you that traction. And so they get used to you feeding them that kind of content. And younger me is just thinking like, oh, you know, I'm getting all these follows, I'm getting all these likes, like I must be doing what I've always set out to do, right? Because that was, you know, a part of what I had set out to do. And then somewhere along the lines in 2020, I think I started to register that in my head, because I was watching other people who had slowly built a fan base and then slowly kind of started to take off. And I was like, I should have emulated that. And I didn't exactly say that to myself, but I knew it was something I wanted to do. And one of those people that emulated that and that I actually got to meet up with was Jesse James West. So Jesse James invited me out to live with him in Los Angeles in 2020. If you don't know who Jesse is, you are living under a rock, I feel like, at this point, especially if you watch YouTube a lot. And anyway, we lived together for a little bit. And the reason this is so crucial to my journey is because I saw his growth and I thought to myself, I knew I was in kind of a predicament of my own, but I thought, okay, if I emulate what he did, I can have that same sort of thing. And at that very moment when I had that thought and decided to run with it, I totally lost sight of my original goal, plan, everything of owning a gym, my own brand. Like, I literally lost sight of all of that right then and there when I made that decision. And so for like the next 4 to 5 months, I tried to emulate Jesse's content, and it really didn't work. Like, I couldn't show up with that personality that he does or that kind of charisma that he has on camera. It just wasn't me. And then, like I said, at this point, I'm aimless. Like, I don't know where I'm really at in terms of like what I was trying to accomplish anymore with social media, YouTube, all of that. And so I was honestly lost from this point until very further down this timeline. And also in between this point, I was getting into a relationship. And so I think one of the big things that happened during this transition, and now at this point we're at 2020 to 2021, when I was getting into this relationship, I think one of the big things that was on my mind was, okay, well, I need to be able to support this person and myself, because I know I'm gonna move out soon. And like, if this person moves in with me, and like any way to sum that part up, as I was being, how do I word this? Like, I was thinking way too far ahead, for someone that I had barely known for 4 to 5 months. And it's goofy to look back on, but this relationship plays a huge part going further down. But like I had mentioned, I was pretty aimless at this point. Like, I didn't know what I was chasing anymore at this point. I was just kind of throwing anything at the wall and seeing if it would stick. And I did this all the way up until I moved to Houston. And we're in 2021 now. And kind of right before I moved to Houston, I was going through it mentally because I knew I had messed up somewhere. And that mess up felt, how do I word this? Like, it felt like I couldn't reverse it. Like, there was no way of reversing what I had done. And it was because I had this black and white thinking, like, okay, either I can quit or I can keep going with like what I currently have instead of starting everything new, which I've basically done, as some of you guys may know. I mean, this video is starting something new. And I think the reason I locked into that mindset was because I was dating someone and I had already committed, like, okay, I'm going to Houston, so I needed to be able to provide myself with monetary. And that, how do I word this? I'm like stuck. That monetary that I had from that page and the YouTube and everything was providing me a way to live. And so I was like, okay, I'm gonna stick with it. And all that, I just put essentially a lot of pressure on myself with sticking with something because I was scared that I wasn't gonna be able to support myself, which honestly makes sense. I'm kind of happy that I did that, because if I went down to Texas and restarted everything, I probably would have put myself under a lot more stress and whatnot. But anyway, decided to move to Texas, stuck with the page, was even more miserable because I felt boxed in. I think at this point, this is when I really started to feel boxed in my creativity and everything, because like I mentioned, I was aimless. There was no more in my head of the 2019 version of me. Does that make sense? The 2019 thoughts and the visions that I had were no longer relevant. There was no clear defined path of this is where we're going, this is how it's going to be. It was just straight up just gone. Like, I was literally aimless. Like I said, I was literally throwing ideas at the wall. I mean, even at one point I made a video and it was titled like buying my new friend a car prank, and that is so big YouTuber David Dobrik type stuff. And so Houston was just a mess from the get-go. And I think it didn't make it worse because now it's paid off later on, but I invited someone who's a dear friend of mine now named Devin down there to help me film and whatnot, because I didn't want to continue doing what I was doing in Washington, film and take all the pictures by myself, because that was hard. In my beginning journey, I had my friend James help me out, some of you guys remember from the old days, and he would help me film and take pictures. And so when he left, that workload I carried on for over a year and a half, and it was a lot, you know, like having to do the timer, set up the camera in multiple places and get it to record, set it up on the tripod. And so I thought, okay, Devin's gonna help out a lot with this. And it was great. Devin down there was a good addition. He was also someone that I could like come to and talk about problems that I was dealing with, because during this time down in Houston, I actually was going through a lot mentally. Like there was just a lot of stress and anxiety on my shoulders. And like I mentioned, I was getting into a relationship during that time period. I was trying out Jesse's kind of form of content, and that relationship went really, really downhill once I got to Texas. And I think I've really been downplaying that part of everything and what I've been talking to you guys about on social media. I don't want to create drama. I hate drama, but one of the things that I kept very secret from my audience was the relationship and how it affected me. It is so crucial to the story of this learning curve that I've gone through that I need to share some of it because it has such a valuable lesson. And so essentially when I was down in Texas, things went bad with this relationship. I can't just say that. But what had happened is this person hadn't been through a long distance relationship like this before. And I had already been through one. And so I kind of had better experience at this, and that's fine. You know, we all go through things differently in life. We all have different experiences that make us better suited for certain situations. And this person just wasn't. And there was one point where this person called me 46 times in one night. And I'm like looking back, and I know a lot of you guys might be asking yourself like, why didn't you just leave? And I think one of the big things was, and this is the crucial part right here, is like, I felt guilt tripped into staying, you know, because this person had mentioned, oh, you left to Texas, you left this, and I just felt guilt tripped. I felt like, dang, I did do that. And one of the things I realized from that relationship experience, and I don't want, again, I'm not trying to make anyone look bad. I think we all have points in our life where we make mistakes, even that person. And I think that I made mistakes too in that as well. Like I definitely should have probably left the relationship before I left. I think that would have probably been a smart move on my end so that I didn't have to put that person through worry, but at the same time, I'm not responsible for other people's emotional well-being. And yeah, I just felt really guilt tripped. And the valuable lesson I took from that was, if you're chasing a dream and you're trying to figure out your life, if someone tries to guilt trip you from your mistakes, leave. I don't care how important that person is to you. Cut them off, let them go. It's going to be better for both of you. And I think that is something that I did wrong. Like, I want to put that out there. That was a mistake I did, because I could have left and made it easier for both of us earlier on. But I didn't. And it caused so much stress, like just way too much stress that just more stress than I could handle. And I'm glad that it's over, and I'm glad that I don't talk to this person anymore, but I hope they're doing better. But eventually, while I was down in Houston, I was like, okay, I'm just gonna move back home, because Devin and I had finally come to a conclusion after everything, because he had also been hearing the relationship side too, and he at one point was kind of involved in it, because we would try to work, the relationship was getting in the way, and he was like, dude, I think I just need to go home. And I don't blame him at all for that, because he went down with someone that was just pretty aimless, and I think it was the best decision that both of us could have made. But, you know, I packed up my things, paid a huge deposit to leave my apartment. It was huge. It was like $3,000 just to leave. And mind you, like, I wasn't making crazy money down in Houston. It was just enough for me to live, essentially. And so we pack up, both of us. He leaves a week earlier than me. I'm about to leave. And during that time alone, I think I started to have these thoughts like, okay, this is what happens when you don't plan, or if you don't have a plan in place. Like, if you don't plan, you plan to fail. And that was a huge lesson that I got from that, because the whole time I was down there, we were just scatterbrained. Like, I was just, it just felt like I was making stuff up all the time. like wake up and then trying to figure out that day what we're going to do instead of what I've been doing now. Like I wake up and I know exactly what I'm going to do for the day. And it was messy. It was just really messy. But on my way back, I also got to ride with my grandpa and whatnot. And during this time, I'd also been growing closer to my faith because I'd felt so lost and I needed guidance. And I felt this pull from God. Like now looking back, it's so weird because I didn't come to God. God came to me in that moment. And it's weird because I can't describe that experience. It's so spiritual that I can't really put it into words. But anyway, we had gone on the way back home and I learned a lot from that as well. And I think one of the biggest things that I learned is that when people do something like that for you, like my grandpa flying down to help me out to move back home, I think that's when I realized like that's what true love is for someone. Like, or if you love someone, it's if someone falls down, you're right there to pick them up. Because I think there was other people in my life during that time where I thought maybe they loved me, but then when I look at what my grandfather did for me, I'm like, no, they didn't, because they weren't willing to do that. And I'm not saying like, I expect someone to take a flight down there and take all their time out for me, but I think it's more so the falling and getting back up part. And that was huge for me. But, I got back home. It was a great trip back. And when I got back home, I was in and out of the relationship. I was still kind of guilt tripping myself, but all of a sudden, I don't know what happened. Like it was as if my brain just stopped working right. And I don't remember the exact date when it happened, but it was sometime in November. I was having intrusive thoughts, and I'm just going to give a quick background on the science. So intrusive thoughts come when you are anxious, and there's really nothing to be anxious about, and your brain can't pinpoint what it's anxious about. So it starts coming up with thoughts for the anxiety. Does that make sense? Like if your body is experiencing a feeling, it will come up with thoughts. For example, you're getting really close to a cliff and you start to feel anxious, and then your brain starts producing thoughts of you falling off the cliff, right? That is exactly how intrusive thoughts work. So I'm having these intrusive thoughts that are totally against who I am. And these thoughts, like I can't put into words how crazy and bizarre these thoughts are, but like at one point I thought, man, like, am I schizophrenic, right? Like I literally had thoughts like, I was convinced that I was like turning schizo or something. And so I started like looking it up. I eventually found like, okay, I have OCD, and I was like, thinking this will pass. It didn't. I still suffer with it today. And that has been, I think, if not the hardest thing that I have to live with, because it's not just about obsessing over certain things. I realize that it entails a lot more. It's more so like this lack of trust with yourself. Like you don't trust yourself to make good decisions. You don't trust yourself to essentially do anything. And so it's like having a bully inside your head at all times. And yeah, it typically does follow like one certain theme, but for me, I've noticed that it encompasses a lot more. So from that point on, 2021 to 2022, I started to realize like, okay, I'm suffering from a mental disorder because of how driven I was, or how much stress I went through. And not everyone gets OCD from getting through stress. I just want to make that clear. It's just if you're susceptible to it. So like there must be some genetic factor that I have that accounts for that. And I think the valuable lesson I learned from that is stress less. And I know that sounds so, how do I word it? That sounds so cliche, but at the end of the day, if I really would have stressed less, I would have avoided all that. You know what I mean? Like it would have been that simple. If I just wasn't that stressed and anxious about everything, I literally would have avoided something that's probably going to stick with me for the rest of my life. But during this time period, I got baptized, which was great. We're talking 2022 now, and I was still lost, and I'm still battling OCD, and I haven't told any of my family yet. And I think they were probably wondering like what was going on with me, because I'd been really quiet, and a lot of people had noticed my behavior had changed. I'm telling you, like when I say this OCD thing is bad, it is bad. Like this is the last thing I'm gonna say about it so we can carry on, but it is the 7th most debilitating illness in the world. So think about that, 7th. Like some people get on disability for this. And I'm glad that it has gone down because I've gone through therapy for it. I've gotten help for it, which if you're struggling with mental health and you're watching this video, get help because it is not worth to try to fight something by yourself if you don't know anything about it. Like I knew nothing about it and I'm like trying to fight this off myself and it was like impossible. So go get help if you need it. But eventually I'd gotten so tired of basically being consumed by all this, and eventually I did tell my parents what was going on. They thought I was crazy at first too, because like you're trying to, you know, explain to someone you have these thoughts, you know, trying to convince you of something that's not real. They think you're crazy. And eventually I like got them to understand what the actual illness is itself. And once they realized that, I think they were like, okay, you know, dang, that sucks. But I had to keep like living. I had to keep living my life. And like I said, I got tired of being in this area, so I had to keep living my life. And I needed to reestablish trust with myself, and I knew that was something I needed to do. And one of the best ways to establish trust with yourself is to build your confidence. And so what I decided to do was I signed up for a powerlifting meet, bodybuilding show, and a half marathon. And it was something difficult because I had never done any of them, nor have I done any of them in the course of just 3 months. But I did them so that I could prove to myself, like, hey, just because one bad thing didn't go through doesn't mean that that's it. And eventually I did accomplish those things. Like I, you know, competed in the powerlifting meet, I competed in the bodybuilding show, I competed in the half marathon. And that was huge for me as well. That was huge because in that moment of finishing all of that, I realized that just because you have previous failures, your previous failures don't define you as a person. They don't, you know, define, oh, Levi's a loser because he failed this, or I suck because this didn't get done. Like none of that is ever true. Just because you fail at something doesn't mean it's completely over. And that's exactly what going through those, you know, events taught me, is that it's not over. You know, I dictate when it's over, not this, like me, my consciousness dictates when it's over, and I decided it wasn't over. And also going through that, it really got me back to the basics. Like it got me closer to that vision that I had in 2019. Like during that moment, I started to realize this is what I was going for. Like this was the stuff I talked about competing. Like I literally have videos on my channel dated almost 4 years back where I'm talking about, oh, am I going to compete in a powerlifting meet? Am I going to compete in a bodybuilding show? You know, a day in the life of an athlete and all of that. And that right there is when I started to realize, like, man, it was fitness that I loved. Like that was the aim. The aim was to inspire others with this kind of stuff. And it really got me back on track. Now we're still in 2022, and I think this was one of the biggest years for me personally for understanding business, because I had started a clothing brand in August, and this was a hard decision to make, especially because my OCD kind of started to come back in August, September. I had kind of gone away a little bit through the course of the training for those things, like the powerlifting meet, the bodybuilding show, and the half marathon. And it tends to waver and like go away over time. And it kind of gone away, and I was feeling good, and I was like, I'm gonna start a clothing brand, you know, because I had just got dropped by Young LA, and I was needed something to essentially do. And I also remember having this thought randomly too, like I actually didn't get, now that I think about it, I wasn't even dropped by Young LA yet. I got jumped by Young LA like 3 months later. But something had just said to my head, I should start a clothing brand. And so I prayed on it, because I told my grandpa about it. I was like, what do you think? And he was like, why don't you pray on it? You know, I can't make this decision for you. And so I prayed on it. And when I prayed on it, literally 3 days later at the gym, I had been seeing this guy at the gym, and I had no idea who he was. And on the 4th or 5th day of him being there, I was sitting around, and he came up to me and goes, hey, you know, we have some mutual friends. My name's Rory. It's nice to meet you. And that's how Rory and I met. And during that time that we were talking about a lot of things. We talked about Texas, like my experience and whatnot. And I can't remember what he asked me. I think maybe he asked me like, oh, what's something you've been working on? And I told him, I just started this clothing brand, but like, I don't know where to begin. I really want to get going with it. I just don't know where to go. And little did I know that this guy has his own clothing brand. Like, he runs and operates. Like, he had the information that I needed to get started with my brand. Like, fear was really holding me back from making this decision because, like, I didn't even know what to do. There were so many what ifs and like, how do you do this and how do you do that? And so that's when Kill-Bilt was born. Essentially, when I met Rory, Kill-Bilt was finally born. And that was great. That was awesome. And it created a great friendship. And one of the values that I've learned in that is don't try to control everything, because I literally prayed on it and everything fell through. Like, if I tried to do everything my own way, I probably would have gotten too confused, gave up, and never even prayed on it. And maybe that would have never happened, or maybe it would have. Who knows? But I literally reminded myself in that moment, this is what happens when you let go of things, because if I would have tried to figure all of it out myself, I probably would have, dug myself into the ground and gotten too tired and been like, oh, I hate doing this, because I never would have figured it out. This wasn't the only thing that happened with meeting Rory. Rory had also opened my eyes to the world of entrepreneurship and business that I'd always wanted. And what I mean, I would love to, I was gonna say, oh, what I mean by that, but more specifically, Rory started to open my eyes to things about business that I always wanted to do. Does that make sense? Like, I always wanted to do business and entrepreneurship, but I didn't understand certain things about business, like target market and other specifics I said I wasn't going to get into, but he really opened my eyes to that. And that's really what leads to this decision, because one of the biggest things that I have learned about creating content and niche and everything like that is you gotta stick with the original plan of what you want to do. So in other words, with this channel, because I did want to explain my channel a little bit through this documentary, I had started off originally doing what I wanted. Then I had transitioned into posting like Jesse James West. Then from there, I was just throwing anything out that I thought would stick. And by anything, I literally mean anything. And then finally, in like that last, and I would say like the last year, I have actually been getting really closer to what I wanted to do. I would say, if not exactly what I wanted to be doing. And so in between there, the majority of those years, I built up an audience on this channel that wasn't following me for me. Like, it didn't make sense how, for me personally, I was like, okay, back when I was at 4,000 subs, I was getting just as much views as I am, at 25,000. Like, this doesn't make sense. Like, none of this is adding up. And so that's where it really opened my eyes to the business side of things, where I really started to understand, like, oh, if I would have just stuck with the plan, it probably, I probably would have seen it through. But at the end of the day, because pretty much what I've said now wraps up where kind of I'm at, like, from meeting Rory till now, it's really just been like this huge business understanding of everything and getting me back on track with where I wanted to be. Like, I had to fall off the track almost to get back on it. The last few things that I'm about to say, I don't want to try to force anyone to God or anything, but I want to give you guys this huge, like, big picture of what happened. So I started YouTube and everything in 2019. If all of that had worked out, which, some of what I did worked out, but if everything had worked out just the way it needed to right when I started, I would have never have known any of these business tactics. I wouldn't have had the character development that I have now. I wouldn't have had this understanding of psychology, so much more. I would have just probably been like this young asshole who was like, confident off of materialistic things, and probably would have been just so full of himself. But now that I have been through that, and now I feel like I can finally get back on track, and just essentially what I'm trying to get at is God is real, because if he would have let me have everything, I never would have needed him. Does that make sense? Like, if I would have just had everything handed to me, I never would have needed to rely on him for any of this. And I know that might be confusing, but I'm having a hard time wording exactly what I'm trying to say. I think at the end of the day, I really would have been so much worse off with all of everything being handed to me, because if later on in life, if everything collapsed, you know, maybe I have kids and maybe I have a wife. Well, I probably need a wife to have kids, but essentially, if everything would have happened later on, I would have not had the information that I had now to fix everything. Like, now I have information to fix everything, which is essentially what I'm doing. That's why this channel has come to an end, because it's time to fix everything. I'm back on track, and I know where I'm going, and I know what I want to do. So if you don't think that God is real, or if he has a plan for your life, I think my testimony right here of me starting, going through things and challenges and just failures, mistakes, but learning so much information, developing as a different kind of person, and now getting back on track and able to start again, I think that should say something to anyone watching this about how real God is. Like, just imagine if I would have had everything handed to me. I probably wouldn't be where I am or have my faith in him. Now, where do I see myself, or where do I see the next channel going? I mean, hopefully it does what I always wanted it to do. You know, I really only started YouTube and social media to open my own gym and start my own clothing brand, so, you know, social media could fund those things, and obviously make an inspiration on many through the gym, through the clothing brand, and build community. Like, that's really why I started. I also really love video and photography. Like, I don't know if you guys noticed on my Instagram, everything that I post is very close to professional. I'm still like an amateur, but I would say, you know, compared to other people in my space, there's a clear difference that I am sort of kind of into photography quite a bit. I mean, it is like my side hustle. It's what I do on the side. I literally am a video editor for my buddy Devin. That's how that worked out. You know, I became a video editor, and I can financially support myself because of Devin, who I met in Texas, which is crazy. Another literal reason as to how God is real. But yeah, I mean, I see it going well from here on out. You know, like, I have faith now with the information that I have that it will do well, just as long as I stick according to the plan and I don't, you know, get distracted by, you know, what's going well for other people. Like Jesse, for example. I think one of the things I also forgot to mention is I saw how much money he was making and stuff, and that was really, you know, I was like, dang, like, I would love to do that and make that much money. And so just sticking to the plan is one of the biggest things from this, and I think a lot of people need to take away from that. You know, if you have something that's good and people are doubting you, or if you start to, you know, develop doubt in your head, I think what you need to do is remind yourself why you started, why you're doing it, where you're going, and tell that doubt to basically shut the hell up, and that you're going to keep going no matter what comes into your head. So yeah, I mean, I can't say that the next channel is going to blow up. I literally can't say that, but I think this time I'm going into it with so much more confidence, and I feel a lot more at peace with this decision. Like, I genuinely feel more peace making this decision. And I think one of the big reasons is because for a while, I felt like I had to post certain kind of content to, like, get my YouTube off the ground. Whereas now I feel like a lot more free to post what I want. You know, I would hold myself back in so many of my older videos of, like, what I would record. You know, kind of toward the end, I would start to record, like, the fishing, the outdoor stuff. And that was because I realized, like, that was the stuff that I loved posting at first, and that was part of the original plan. And so just stick with it. Like, it's what I love. And that's what people are going to end up watching me for. Like, it was working back then, or at least one person was watching back then. And there's a saying, if one person can watch you, a million people can watch you. So as this is it. This is the last video on the channel. It's been a wild ride, and I'm excited to see you guys on the next channel. Thank you guys. I literally can't thank you enough. You guys have changed my life. I would say, like, the 1,000 of you that consistently watch over the past 4 years have really done something amazing for me, and I literally don't know how to put it into words other than, if this next channel picks up, I will make it entirely back up to you. Like, no doubt about that. See you guys in the next one.